本集节目由永丰金控冠名赞助，翻转金融，共创美好生活，以新闻开启国际视野。永丰金控与您一同掌握全球脉动。大家好，欢迎收听联合开炮，我是郭崇伦。这一次美国的总统大选所有的民调都显示，经济是选民最关心的一个议题。虽然现在美国的经济情况优于其他的 G7 国家，但是前总统川普从竞选以来，在经济议题上面一直保持领先的优势，也就是说，选民其实是对于现在的民主党政府是非常不满的，他们希望能够回到川普时候的一个路线。但是现在选举剩下2周，双方在经济议题上的那个差距正在缩小当中。贺锦丽最近提出来，中产阶级的税收，这个大建这些住宅以及就业政策上面，开始受到选民的这个欢迎。但是川普仍然在通货膨胀还有这个关税上面，是在领先的。谁能够比较妥善的回应这个经济上面的关切，会是影响美国大选的关键。我们在日前邀请到美国耶鲁大学的高级研究员Stephen Roach，他曾经任职过美国联准会，也曾经在摩根士丹利担任首席经济学家跟亚洲区的主席，长达30年了。他跟中国大陆的关系非常的深，不过最近因为他批评香港在整个统治上面已经远远的落后，而受到香港政府的反驳，甚至要跟他来澄清。那我们在之前跟他谈了关于美国大选以及跟中国大陆的经济相关的议题。以下是我们的专访。
People are saying that the presidential election is usually decided by economic issues. Who do you think that is in a more advantageous position by now? Is it Trump or Harris? At the beginning of the election, people are saying that the inflation is against the Democrat. Do you think it still is?
That's obviously an important question. The polls still show that economics, I think there's great confusion over the issue. There's no question that price levels, which were boosted very sharply by a COVID-related price shock in 2021 and 2022, have been billed as a problem that Joe Biden created. However, we have to be fair in recalling that COVID itself broke out under the administration of former President Trump, who did a terrible job in dealing with the pandemic. So the price shock that still is evident today is as much an outgrowth of Trump's earlier policies as it is with respect to policies that occurred during the Biden administration. The inflation rate itself has come down dramatically, but it's still positive. When you have a positive inflation rate, the price level still keeps increasing, albeit at a much slower pace. And so the Biden-Harris administration is left with a still sharply elevated price level that was an outgrowth of Trump's very poor COVID policies. So the American voters don't really have the patience or maybe even the sophistication to disentangle this and all they know is the prices are high, and that's Biden's fault, and by inference, they put that on Kamala Harris.
I'd like to ask you some of the policy that Trump had raised. Trump had proposed a 10% tariff on all imports into the United States, paired with the 60% of tariff on all Chinese imports if he is being elected. But if Harris is elected, is she going to reduce the tariff currently being leveled on by both Trump and Biden administration on Chinese imports, or she will have a different approach on the Chinese imports tariff?
Well, first of all, Trump's tariff policy is a serious mistake. It was a mistake in 2018 and 2019 when he raised them, and it would be an even greater mistake should he increase them more. Unfortunately, the former president does not understand what a tariff is. He doesn't realize that tariffs are paid by importers, not by exporters. That's such a basic and fundamental misunderstanding of a critical policy that it stops the debate right there. Moreover, yesterday, in one of his campaign rallies, he threatened to raise tariffs to 200% on one company, Caterpillar Tractor, because he doesn't like the fact that they're moving production to Mexico. He views them as a weapon to force people to do things the way he wants them done, rather than a policy instrument that actually ends up having adverse consequences for American companies and consumers. You asked me about Vice President Harris's policies. I don't think right now we have any information that would suggest that she would have different economic policies, especially with respect to China, than Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, as you know, continued most of Trump's tariffs during the 3.5 years of his administration. I think that's too bad. I think he had an opportunity to roll back those tariffs early on in his presidency, and his reluctance to do that, I think, was a mistake, potentially a serious mistake. And I would be hopeful that should Kamala Harris prevail in the election, that she would conduct a review of all U.S. policies toward China and our other trading partners, and consider reversing some of these tariffs that are currently in place. That's a hope. I have no concrete basis on which to say that.
Some people are worrying that we are seeing an irreversible trend of American protectionism since this elections. Do you see that this is going to be the trend? And how is that going to affect the global trading regime in that regard?
Well, the second half of your question is the easiest one to answer. If protectionist actions continue, let alone escalate, that will clearly do further damage to the global trading regime. The damage has already been fairly severe. Supply chain decoupling is underway. Global trade as a share of world GDP has flattened out and started to decline. And the WTO, because of largely U.S. political concerns, has become dysfunctional because there are no new judges in the dispute resolution system. So these policies need to be seriously addressed. The political debate in the U.S. is that now puts free trade at odds with what Americans are trying to achieve in terms of job security and wage growth. And I think economists have probably not done a good job in explaining the benefits of free trade, which are considerable for the U.S. and considerable in reducing poverty around the world. But our populist politicians have appealed to more nationalistic, self-centered instincts, which unfortunately are backfiring.
Let me ask you about Trump's proposal of a weak dollar. What he means is not only in terms of exchange rate for a weak dollar, but also to encourage other cyber currency to incorporate into American currency system. How is that going to affect global financial stability? And do you believe that now there's some proposal by the BRICS countries or some of the global South hoping to have an alternative global currency model to replace the dollar? Do you think that replacement is going to be in fact anytime soon?
There's been so much discussion about the reserve currency status of the US dollar for longer than I care to remember. The dollar has had a number of sell-offs in the last 50 years. And yet, in the aftermath of those, the dollar has always rallied back to new highs. The dollar as a share of official global or foreign exchange reserves has come down somewhat from 70 to 60%, but it's still by far the dominant preference for reserve currencies amongst countries and reserve managers and central banks around the world. I think, notwithstanding Trump's view that he wants a weak dollar to boost American competitiveness in manufacturing, I think as long as the Federal Reserve is able to maintain fairly stable price performance, and there's every reason to think they will, that I think the dollar's position as reserve currency will remain intact, despite what President Trump says. The currencies don't move because a leader or a president starts screaming about them. They move because of basic fundamentals of one system relative to the alternatives. And on that basis, the U.S. system, I think, still remains quite strong. That's not to say anything is permanent. It could weaken. Trump has also indicated that he thinks the president should have a greater say on Federal Reserve policy.
Right.
That would be a negative. That would be a negative for the dollar, but I don't think would precipitate a dramatic loss of the dollar's reserve currency status. If it does occur, and someday it might, it would be more gradual than abrupt.
Let me ask you a more abstract concept, which is the Washington Consensus. This consensus after the World War II is known politically as a liberal democracy and economically for free market and free trade system. But we are seeing that during this election campaign, both candidates, Vice President Harris and Donald Trump, seem to be abandoning this consensus. What I mean is they are all against the acquisition of U.S. steel by the Nippon Steel, for example. Do you believe that the Washington Consensus will still hold after the election of this year?
Well, I hope it will. I think what I would have greater concerns over the answering that question if Donald Trump were to be reelected, than I would over Kamala Harris. I think she's still and her advisors And the Biden administration is still committed to the liberal democratic order that has generally prevailed since World War II. There's a broad recognition, though, even in the Democratic Party, that the rules of global engagement consistent with this consensus need to be changed and need to be modified and need to be brought up to date. When the liberal democratic order was first conceived of post-World War II, there was really only one dominant economic power. Other major economic powers, especially Germany and Japan, had largely been destroyed. China was still in the throes of a political revolution and would not begin to emerge as a significant global force, for another 50 or 60 years. Europe in general was ravaged and torn by war, and the former Soviet Union was also under significant pressure in the immediate post-war era. And the U.S. Clearly emerged as the leader of a unipolar world, defining the values and rules of the liberal democratic order. The world has come a long way since those early days, and so the values and the principles that have defined this global order need to be updated as a result. And my hope would be that that would be an orderly process. There would be some modifications in terms of cross-border trade, investment flows, capital flows, even labor flows and information flows. Mm-hmm. And of course, the overlay to that is a new era of artificial intelligence, which breaks down all borders and creates enormous opportunities and risks to global governance. So it's not it's a great question, but it's not like these are the 10 commandments that are carved in stone, and they are never changed by circumstances. The world, the liberal democratic order certainly is in need of rethinking and revising, but not in any way, in my opinion, of tossing it aside.
Mm-hmm. One of the tension economically between China and the United States right now, besides tariff, is President Biden's technology control policy of small yard, high fence. Do you think this policy has been working so far? And if Vice President Harris is going to be elected, would she continue this policy?
Well, that's an important question. It's hard to say that this new framework of addressing advanced technologies is working. It's certainly getting a great deal of attention. It's driven an enormous interest around the world. It's also gotten the attention of America's allies in Europe and in Asia to join in sharing this view of restricting advanced technologies for national security purposes. But you asked me if it worked or if it's working, and I'm not so sure of that. And my classic counterexample of that is Huawei. Huawei is the poster child in Washington for the small yard, high fence, and the Trump administration, followed by the Biden administration, has tried to strangle Huawei and really make it almost impossible for Huawei to stay in business. Huawei is a controversial company, but it's a company that has always invested very heavily in research and development. And in response to the sanctions and the sanctions on Huawei's supply chain, Huawei took an enormous hit to its revenue in, I think, 1921 in particular, but has now come back dramatically with a new generation of smartphones. And I read overnight with a new laptop that is made largely, if not completely, with Chinese-made components. And so the unintended consequences of the small yard high fence is to light a fire under the competitive resolve of companies and countries that we're trying to contain, and possibly create a more powerful force on the other side of the tech war than we originally envisioned. So there's a distinct possibility that this approach will backfire.
But some people will argue that exactly the success of Huawei, they think that there must be some leakage or some hole within this control regime. So the necessary thing is to expand and tighten up of this control. As you know, that now the Biden administration is negotiating with Japan and Netherlands in order to have this kind of control more comprehensive in terms of semiconductors manufacturing. Do you think that is the right approach, or do you think the approach would have, what kind of effect would this approach will have?
Again, I just think that will force our adversaries, in this case China, to double down their bets on domestic alternatives. The pressures that are being put on the Netherlands and Japan have to do with the lithography that is used to create these high-end chips. And China is not able to make a 3 nanometer chip like the leading company in your country can do, but it's creating 5 or 7 nanometer chips with legacy technology that it's in terms of lithography that it's purchased from the Netherlands and Japan, and through development of domestic alternatives in China. So I'm not sure the answer is just we've got the right idea, let's just tighten it up and get our allies to agree. I think that China's technological prowess is strong, and we can expect and should expect a response. Xi Jinping has stressed, as have other Chinese leaders, that there is a clear need for indigenous or homegrown integration, and China is hard at work at that right now. And I think the more we push in terms of restricting their access to Western technology and production equipment, the more intense the response will be from China to come up with alternatives of its own.
But for the past years and a year and a half, Chinese economy have been experiencing slowdown. When do you think the Chinese economy will recover? Will it recover in the near future? And if not, what kind of impact would this slowdown have on global economy?
This is clearly the most serious slowdown that the modern day Chinese economy has experienced since the beginning of the reforms and opening up in the early 1980s. And it's not due to the trade war, it's not due to the tech war, it's due to China's own problems. There are cyclical and structural forces at work here. The cyclical is clearly the property crisis, which the Chinese have been trying to resolve now for several years. they took some major actions again overnight, and yet, the problem is not going to vanish quickly. And the structural problems are deep-rooted. Demography, especially a shrinking working-age population, weak productivity, because too much of the economy is now shifted back to low productivity state-owned enterprises, and and then of course the high levels of debt. And so the structural problems and the cyclical problems have created a period of decidedly subpar economic growth in China that's likely to last for several more years. There's no magic fix to this. And then you add on the things that we've been talking about earlier, the more hostile external environment and the pressures that is going to put on Chinese export growth. The growth situation is especially challenging. And, that puts the pressure on China finally to address weak internal private consumption. And it's failed to do that for the 20 years that I've been writing about that and suggesting as a policy imperative for Beijing.
Finally, early this year, you have a very frank and direct criticism on Hong Kong government. Are you still being welcome in Hong Kong and in China?
Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight. I was not critical of the Hong Kong government. What I said in an op-ed in the Financial Times in early February of this year was that Hong Kong was facing three critical issues. One, its very tight economic linkage to the United States, to China, and with China, Chinese economic growth weak, as we just discussed, it would be miraculous for Hong Kong to recover on its own. And the Hong Kong economy has been in a protracted and really unprecedented growth slowdown. Secondly, I argued that Hong Kong was caught in the middle of the US-China conflict, and I think that's still the case. And thirdly, and most controversial, is the political point you alluded to, that is a reflection of the tightening up of political and press freedoms under the new national security law frameworks that were first imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing in 2020, and then enacted by the Hong Kong legislature earlier this year, and that's led to ongoing chill in the political climate and an exodus of expat talent, and so I wrote about that, and it's caused a considerable controversy. I've given speeches about that. I've been back to Hong Kong to talk directly about it. I have every plans to go back to Hong Kong in November. I have the missions, and I'm looking forward to continuing to engage the community in the concerns that I raised earlier. I did offer, I extended an invitation to one of the leading politicians in Hong Kong, Regina Ip, to debate me, because she's been very critical. And she has, by the information I've received, turned down my invitation to debate. So clearly there's something that they're either unwilling or afraid to discuss. But I'm a big believer in frank, honest, and open debate. And I would be hopeful that the Hong Kong government would feel they have nothing to hide and are willing to come out and talk about it in the open.
Okay. Thank you for your time. And if you ever drop by in Taipei, we're happy to meet and have a coffee or have a chat. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Roach.
Thank you.
上网搜寻 VIP.udn.com 到联合报数位版，看更多精彩的报道。